Nobody tells you that grief is loud. Like not the crying kind of loud, though I mean I we all know that happens too, but I mean the kind of loud like where you're standing in the grocery store 6 weeks after the thing happened, reaching for the wrong brand of coffee because it was their brand and you grab it automatically and suddenly the fluorescent lights are too bright and the music is too much and the person behind you is too close and your chest is doing something that has no name and you're having what looks like from the outside like a perfectly normal Tuesday and what feels like from the inside like the floor just disappeared out from under you. Nobody tells you that grief does not follow a schedule, that it does not respect the amount of time that has passed. It does not care if you've been doing well, that you've been functioning, that maybe you went back to work. It doesn't care that you've answered emails and laughed at something last Thursday. It's going to show up anyway in the grocery store, in a song, or in the specific quality of afternoon light on a particular day in October, in the smell of something that you can't even name that hits you like a physical thing and takes you somewhere you thought you were done being taken. Nobody tells you that grief is not just for death, that you can grieve a relationship that ended, a version of yourself you had to leave behind, a dream that did not survive contact with reality, a season of life that closed before you were ready, a person who is still alive but no longer who you knew them to be. Maybe your faith community turned out to be something very different from what you thought you were joining. Maybe you're grieving a business that failed or a child who grew up in a way, um, a marriage that has changed, or maybe even just a body that stopped working the way it used to. And nobody tells you that moving through grief is not the same as moving on from it. That through and in are two completely different directions, and that the one most people try is the one that does not actually work. And so today I want to talk about grief and not around it, but through it. You guys, welcome to the Listen Bitch podcast. I believe we're in episode 28 of the Rebellion season. Um, and I guess this episode's gonna ask something from you that other episodes didn't really require. Not just your attention, not just your willingness to be challenged or convicted or called out, but I want you to let this episode allow you to let something in, to sit with something that our entire culture, our productivity obsessed, keep moving, good vibes only, um, everything happens for a reason culture, okay, that's been desperately trying to keep you from sitting with. Because the truth is, no matter how you're grieving or what you're grieving, your grief is real. Whatever it is, whatever size it comes in, however long ago it started, however inconvenient it is to the version of your life you're trying to build, it is real and it deserves space. And I just want to give it that space today. If you guys are new here, I am Brandon Lynette, your voice authority coach. Your mess is your message, you guys. And, grief is one of mine, and mine isn't from losing someone close to me in that way, but it's come in forms that I expected, in forms I absolutely did not. And what I've learned in the hard way that you can only learn things that matter is that the grief you do not go through goes nowhere. Somewhere, everywhere. It doesn't it it's it does not dissolve. It does not expire. It finds a room in your house and it moves in and it starts rearranging furniture, and then you wonder why nothing feels right anymore without ever connecting it back to the thing you decided you were done with. And so um I want to do that today. I want to connect that, okay? And before I do that, you guys, this episode is brought to you by my favorite neurotech device, the little patch I wear. Okay. Today I want to tell you guys about my secret weapon for this show. which is the peace patch, okay? Because if there is any episode in this entire season where the nervous system needs support, it's probably this one, okay? Um peace patch is what I reach for when the weight of the world, like the real weight, the accumulated weight, the weight that does not have a name, um but that lives in the chest when it's too much for a Tuesday and there's no drugs in this, okay? No ingredients. I have a stacked schedule and I just need that calm so my brain can stay centered on recording a bunch of interviews today. But this is vibrotactile technology. And what it's doing is it's sending precise signals through my skin to the neural pathways that regulate my stress response and my emotional state. Okay. You guys, this is braille for the brain. It tells your nervous system like you're safe, you can settle, you do not have to hold everything quite so tightly right now. And sometimes that is the most important message that your body can receive. Okay. I do have the link in the show notes. The peace patch is if you struggle with anxious feelings or racing thoughts, or just, if you're like me and you have a beautifully neurospicy brain, okay, and it's everywhere. Sometimes that piece just gets everything quiet enough that I can focus on task to task instead of sitting here with those anxious feelings of like, hurry up, record this episode, move on, stop yapping, we got shit to do, okay? So please get in my show notes. Peace is my favorite, okay? Now, grief is not a problem to be solved. Okay. It's a process to be moved through. And that distinction, like it sounds simple, right? But it's the thing that a lot of people get wrong. Like you, you just don't fucking grasp it. And then everybody wonders why they feel stuck for years, you know? And when grief is treated like a problem, like you make other people uncomfortable or whatever the problem is, the goal becomes resolution, closure, like getting to the other side, reaching the stage where it no longer hurts and you can file it away and move forward with your life. And that framing produces a very fucked up kind of suffering, the suffering of someone who is grieving and also fighting the grief, okay, who is in pain and also ashamed of still being in pain, who's doing the hard work of like processing loss and simultaneously running that act of being over it because you've decided for whatever reason or you've been told that this much time means you should be further along because that's what someone else's timeline was like. There is no further along. There is only through. And through means moving with the grief rather than around it or away from it or over it. It means letting it be present without letting it be permanent. Okay. It means feeling what there is to feel fully without the management layer, without the performance of okayness, um, and trusting that the feeling does not last forever when it feels like it might. Um, and there's brain science here. Okay. So I know this is going to give you a little different perspective outside of any grief advice you've ever been given. Okay. Because grief is not primarily an emotional experience, it's a neurological one. When you lose something, um, a person, a relationship, a version of your life, a dream, your brain has to do this very specific and difficult kind of work. It has to update its model of the world. And the model it has to update is not abstract. It is embedded in thousands of specific neural pathways that were built through repeated experience of the thing that is now gone. Okay. Every morning, your brain expected that person to be there. Every plan it made included that relationship. Every version of your future it modeled contained that specific dream. Like those aren't feelings, that's a neural structure, physical architecture. And grief is the process of dismantling that architecture and rebuilding something that accounts for the new reality. That is why grief takes time, not because you're a weak ass bitch, okay? Because you're not. It's not because you're holding on too long or because you haven't prayed hard enough or forgiven fast enough or moved on quickly enough, because your brain is doing structural renovation work, and renovation takes longer than decoration. And the other thing I feel like that nobody tells you is the brain does not distinguish between types of loss as clearly as like our culture does. The loss of a relationship your family didn't understand, the loss of a pregnancy nobody knew about, loss of a job that was more than a job, the loss of a community that was your entire social world, the loss of who you used to be before the thing that happened that changed everything, whatever speaks to you, that your brain processes all of these through the same neural mechanisms. The grief is real, regardless of whether anyone else validates it as grief worthy, and the work of moving through it is the same. I have experienced grief on a level not where I've lost someone close to me to death, but I've lost people. I have lost people. I've lost a version of relationships as a parent. My kids growing up and moving on and doing their own thing, like that, I can't explain that level of grief. And if I were to talk to someone who has experienced grief different, they would say that's ridiculous. Your kids are still alive, right? So stop letting society or these other people dictate what it is that you're grieving, okay? And we know there's, 5 stages of grief. I think you guys have heard of that. And if you haven't, um let me explain to you why they are simultaneously helpful and one of the most damaging frameworks we've given people for navigating a loss, okay? Stay with me. um Elizabeth Ross gave us denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And those things are real. Those experiences happen. Most people recognize themselves in at least some of them. The damage is not in the stages, the damage is in the word stages, because stages implies a sequence. Stages implies progress. Stages implies that if you are in anger, you are further along than you were in denial. And if you make it to acceptance, you have arrived somewhere and the work is done. Babe, grief is not stages, okay? It's weather. It's non-linear. It's unpredictable. It's capable of full reversal without warning and entirely unimpressed by your imaginary timeline. You can be at acceptance on a Tuesday and back in anger on a Wednesday because you found an old voicemail. You can be completely fine for 6 months and then completely not fine for 2 weeks. And the not fine is not regression. It's just the fucking weather of grief. It is grief doing what grief does, and it moves through these specific nonlinear ways that healing actually moves. Our culture's desperate need to pathologize, medicalize, and put a timeline. We want to label everything and put timelines on grief. It's not an accident. Okay. Big Pharma, y'all know I'm not a fan, has spent decades and billions of dollars making grief a diagnosable condition with a pharmaceutical solution. What? They want to give you drugs? The DSM, the diagnostic manual that psychiatrists use, has a category called prolonged grief disorder. Prolonged, as in you've been grieving too long, and now that it's a disorder, not a human experience. It's a disorder with treatment options. And what is their favorite treatment option? Drugs, medication, medication that numbs the emotional experience enough that you can function. You're not healing, it's just function. Get back to work. Stop being inconvenient to the productivity machine. Stop requiring accommodation from the people around you. Stop being a reminder that human beings are not actually built for the pace we are demanding of them. I'm not saying medication is never appropriate, okay? I am saying that a culture that turns grief into a disorder and sells you the cure is a culture that is terrified of what happens when people actually feel the full weight of their losses. Because people who feel the full weight of their losses start asking real questions about what shit actually matters. What actually matters, and about who is actually worthy of their loyalty, and about what they're building, and why and for whom, about whether the life they are living is the one they actually want. Grief fully felt produces a level of clarity you would never have otherwise understood. And clarity is very expensive for systems that require your compliance. This is the grief that I experienced that didn't look like grief for a very long time. Okay. Um, Experiencing loss in the ways that get named, the kind that comes with, funeral, condolences, casseroles. Um, those losses are real for people. Okay. Um, The grief that sat in my house the longest um really is when I lost a version of myself. The version that had built something specific in a particular direction, had invested, a fortune, years of time and energy and identity into a framework that I eventually had to walk away from. Okay. I actually talked about the main story. If you guys go back to my last Thursday's episode, what would that be? 26 in the rebellion season, but I don't know what it is in real life. But that the woo space, the Reiki, the season of being in the wrong room, walking away from that was the right thing. Walking away from that was my obedience, and also walking away from that was a loss, a real one. And the community that came with it, the identity that was built around it, the version of the future I'd been building towards that had to be completely redesigned. I didn't really grieve it. Shame just like took over. And I stayed in that space for a very long time. Depression, drank a lot. Um, Realized like, how could I have gotten so off the path from getting closer to Christ? And so I just went through the movements. I moved because moving felt like the right response, right? You leave the wrong room, you go immediately into the right one. I I I just started reading the Bible without grieving, you know. Um but you're not, you want to keep moving. Just get into the next room. Nobody wants to just stand in the hallway between them and have feelings about the room you just left. That's what I told myself. And the grief went to find a room, and it found one, and it lived there so long that I didn't notice it for a really long time. Then I start to notice things like flatness in spaces that should have felt alive, or this was hard, the absolute hesitation I felt before stepping into new work. It's the residue of something unprocessed showing up in places, it had no business being. And the grief doing what grief does when you do not take it through, finding its own way to the surface. Um, and what called that grief out was who I had to become when my oldest daughter moved out. Uh, I had to become someone different. She's still alive, but suddenly, and my girls moved out pretty much the same time, my two oldest girls. Um, I had to become someone different because or it was just so much change. And I realized like I didn't even have, this foundation to stand on. I didn't feel like I could carry the weight of who I needed to become to process my girls, and having also not processed who I needed to become in Christ. I was so lost. I was lost. Lost, I had to stop and grieve at the beginning, you know. I had to grieve the loss of the years. Um I don't grieve the room, right? I literally was working with demons. I don't grieve that. Please don't get that twisted. But there's a loss of the people who were in it with me, the loss of the version of myself who was I was doing my best to be in a direction that turned out to be wrong, doing my best to get closer to God. And I had to mourn that forgive myself and process all these emotions. um and something started to release, and it wasn't everything, and it wasn't instant, but like something released. And now, the new work that I could see in front of me started to make itself visible because it was available. Hesitation started clearing, and then I was able to do things to move into becoming the parent that I needed to be now that my two oldest were gone. um and being able to process and forgive. I made a lot of mistakes. We had a really rough couple of years when I went through a divorce and got remarried. And my two older girls were carrying the weight of that, so it was like just all of this stuff of like, grieving, um holding space for their feelings, figuring out what my identity was, not just in business, but now I'm like, who am I as a mom? Who am I going to be for the four babies still at home? Who am I going to be for the two girls now creating their own life because it doesn't look like I thought it would look like, right? Um, and being in that feeling, I could focus on my nervous system and I could regulate myself and I would be able to allow that space of like whenever I needed to feel the pain or whenever I needed to move, like the flatness starts lifting. And it's not because the grief was over, it's because it had been given permission to exist. That's it. And permission is where the moving through actually begins. I still grieve a lot of that stuff. It's the same thing of like my youngest is 7. I grieve for a baby, for the dependent, like having I've had a baby in my life for 20 almost 24 years. And so she's my last. And now I'm grieving all of the first and all of the lasts. Like this was probably the last year of painting Easter eggs, right? It was a fun art project for the kids. Everybody loved it. She did it by herself this year, and I doubt she'll want to do it next year. All of these things you guys understand, like you're moving through this new process of who to become and how to become. And if you give yourself permission, I don't need the world to tell me it's stupid to grieve stuff. My kids are here. I could literally pick up the phone and call either of my kids. They're, one's 20 minutes away, one's an hour and a half away. It's not a big deal, right? Some of us say that to me, but there's so much more to that. And I want you guys to see that and to honor that and to be like, fuck it, I can grieve. You know, even you guys know I've shared, the deal with my mom and I grieve. I grieve for a mom. And that means like, I literally just talked to her on the phone the other day. And I still grieve that it comes through because she's never going to be, she can't ever take it back and be the mom that I needed, right? So I'm always going to mourn that, or mourn what it would be to have a mom that was present and emotionally available. I'll mourn that forever. People like, she's alive, at least you could talk to her. Yeah, sure. And so, every level that you're growing through is going to be something, that you could potentially grieve. All of it. And it's okay. Just pause for a second. If any of this, lands somewhere that really speaks to you, if you're sitting with, grief right now, big or small, okay, that you've been managing instead of moving through, I want you to do something. Not later, right now. Share this episode with the one person in your life who is carrying something they've not been given permission to name. They need it. They need that permission. And the show grows when you share it with the people that it was made for. Like it, subscribe, make sure you leave a written review. It takes less than 2 minutes and it changes who finds this message in the moment they need it the most. Okay. You have access to people I'll never be able to reach. So, thank you for that. And I promise, I promise you I'm going to nerd out a little bit about the brain today because it is something that I think a lot of people don't understand, but I'm gonna deliver on that promise because the brain science of grief it's so fucking fascinating, and it's the most practically useful things I know and what I discovered in my own process of grief and giving it the space. And I need you to have this information, okay? What is actually happening in your brain when you grieve? Your brain runs something called a predictive processing model. That means that your brain constantly in real time is building predictions about what is going to happen next based on everything it has learned from what has happened before. These predictions are not conscious. They are automatic. They are happening below the level of your awareness in the same way that your brain predicts where your foot will land when you walk without you having to think about each step. When you have a person in your life, a parent, a partner, a friend, a child, your brain builds thousands of these predictions around them. What they smell like, how they sound on the phone, what the energy of a room feels like when they're in it, what your nervous system does when you see their name on your screen, what the shape of Sunday feels like when they're a part of it, All of that is neural prediction architecture, and it's built through repetition, and it is deeply embedded. So when the loss happens, those predictions keep firing because the brain is a pattern completion machine, and it does not stop running a pattern just because the input stopped. This is why you reach for your phone to text someone who is gone, or why you start a sentence with, I should tell, and then you remember that they're not around anymore. And this is why the body sometimes feels the presence of someone who's no longer present. It's not imagination, it is the brain running predictions that have not been updated yet. And the updating, okay? So I'm sorry to disappoint you guys. No, that's not your Mima's ghost. Okay, it is your brain with that prediction of what it feels like for grandma to be with you. Okay, the actual neural work of revising the model, that is what grief is. Every time you feel the loss, your brain is comparing the predicted reality with the actual reality, and in the gap between these two things, it's doing the slow work of revision. And that's why rushing grief does not work. You cannot fast forward neural revision. You can only give it the conditions it needs, which are presence, not avoidance, feeling, not numbing, moving through, not around. And this is so important if your brain is like mine, little neurospicy, because we experience the world with more intensity than most people. Um, our brains are wired for deep feeling. The ones that process emotional information with greater amplitude, that form attachments more deeply, that carry sensory and emotional memories with more vivid detail. Grief doesn't land at the same volume it would land for everybody else, and it's super loud. Um, it's way more physical, and it takes up more of the available bandwidth. And the strategies that help other people manage grief, like the just keep yourself busy, um, focus on the positive, give yourself a timeline, um, just push through. Those kind of strategies are fucking useless for a brain that experiences life at this level of intensity. Um, and what actually works is very different. Okay, it's a different approach, working with your body, not just your mind, because grief lives in the body as much as the brain. So the tightness in the chest and the heaviness in the shoulders, that super deep hollow feeling in your throat, and the emptiness in your gut, all of this, the specific exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep, the disconnection from appetite, from pleasure, from the things you used to do that made you feel like you, the body's holding the grief and the mind trying to manage, and the body needs to be brought back in with the processing. So, focusing on your breathing, like in through your nose, out through your mouth. Everybody's walking around like a mouth breather. um do mindful breathing, in through your nose, out through your mouth, and move your fucking bodies. Sit outside in nature without a phone and no agenda. Cry without immediately stopping it. Let the wave come rather than building a seawall against it. And this isn't some soft bullshit suggestion. This is neurologically sound interventions for a brain that needs to complete the stress cycle, to take the emotional activation all the way through to discharge rather than cutting it off in the middle and wondering why it keeps starting over. It has to finish the cycle. The brain that learns to move through grief rather than around it becomes, over time, more resilient, not less sensitive, not less able to be hurt, but more capable of recovering from the hurt. The pathway from pain to processing gets more established with each trip through it. And the person who's learned to grieve well, who has practiced this through rather than around, is not a person who stops losing things. They're a person who loses things and keeps going, who can hold both the love and loss in the same hand, who does not have to choose between feeling deeply and functioning fully, because you build the neural infrastructure for both. And this is not toughness. This is trained capacity, and it's available to every fucking one of us. And this is the wild card, okay? The one that connects grief to the rebellion in a way you probably don't see coming. The inability to grieve is a feature, right? It's not a bug. It's a feature of the system we're living in. Grief slows you down. I mean, think about it. It slows you down. It asks you to stop. Grief demands that you sit with what actually matters in defiance of everything that's trying to tell you to keep moving, keep consuming, scroll, 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 keep producing and performing. Grief is the interruption the productivity machine cannot afford. It is the pause that asks the questions the noise was designed to draw out. What was this person to me? What did I lose when I lost them? What does that loss tell me about what I actually value? What am I building, and is it worth the cost of building it? Those are dangerous questions for an economy that needs you consuming, for a government that needs you compliant, for a system that profits from your distraction. A person sitting in genuine grief is a person who has temporarily stepped out of the machine. And a person who has stepped out of the machine long enough to ask the real questions, most of the time they decide not to get back in. Big Pharma knows this. The grief medication market is not a response to a problem. It's a preemptive strike against the clarity that grief produces. Get the person functional again before they have questions that grief was generating, before they decide that the life they were living is not actually the one they want, before they get clear enough in the loss to see what was actually worth keeping and what was not. I'm not telling you not to take medication. I'm telling you to be very honest about what you're medicating, whether you're treating a genuine clinical need or whether you're treating the discomfort of your own clarity. Because sometimes the discomfort of grief is not the problem, it's the answer. And numbing the answer is not healing, it's delay. And delay has a compound interest rate. Jesus wept. Before he raised Lazarus, he already knew what he was going to do. He had the power, he had the intention, and he cried anyway. He wept because the grief was real and it deserved to be honored before the miracle happened. He did not just skip to the resurrection, he sat in the loss first. He let the weight of it be what it was. He wept with the people who were weeping, and then he took action. That is the model. Feel it first, then move, not around it, through it, with Jesus in the grief, the same way he is in everything else, not removing the hard thing, but present in a way that makes the through possible. So the first thing you have to do is name what you're actually grieving. And not you guys don't give me the bullshit picture perfect version. But like be really specific and write it down in a place where you're going to be honest with yourself, not just I went through a really hard time. Okay? Like get deep with this. What did you actually lose? And who did you lose? Or what version of your life, your future, yourself did you have to leave behind? The brain cannot update a prediction it is not acknowledged, and naming is the first act of revision. It tells the brain, I know what happened. I'm not pretending it did not happen, so now we could do the fucking work. And then I want you to build one grief practice into your week that is not talking about it or thinking about it, but moving through the body. Maybe a walk with no destination and no podcast. 15 minutes of just sitting outside in the actual air. Okay. Writing in longhand, not typed, but handwritten, whatever comes without editing it. Cry. Cry if it comes without stopping before you're done. Let the wave complete instead of cutting it off in the middle. You are not falling apart when you do this. You are completing the cycle. You're giving your nervous system the discharge it's been waiting for. And every time you do, the revision advances a little further. Third, you have to identify the grief you've been managing instead of moving through. The one you made a deal with, I'll be fine about this. I'm fine about this. I've decided to be fine about this. The one that has found a room in your house and rearranged the furniture. You know what that is. You have probably known for a while. And the invitation, not the demand, the invitation is going to give you, you're going to give it a few minutes of actual presence this week. Not to solve it, babe. Not to fix it. Not to, perform being over it. Just sit with it long enough to say, I know you're there. I'm not pretending you're not. Let's figure this shit out and move through this together. And then fourth, just give yourself the time. Not forever, not indefinitely, but time. Enough time for the brain to do the structural renovation it needs to do. Enough time for the body to complete the cycles it needs to run. Enough time to ask the questions the grief is generating before you rush back into the productivity of not feeling. Because the clarity on the other side up through is worth more than anything you will produce from the position of managed but not processed. The through is where the message lives, and your mess, all of it, including this, is the message. I want you to let this episode in because you have been carrying something. A lot of you have been carrying something for a long time in a way that looks fine from the outside and feels, you know, insane on the inside. And the rebellion, the full, alive, genuinely free rebellion that this whole season's been building on, cannot be fully inhabited by a person who is also managing an unprocessed loss in a back room somewhere. The through is the rebellion. The feeling is the rebellion. The refusal to perform okayness at the expense of your actual healing is the rebellion. And Jesus, the the one who wept before he raised the dead, who sat in grief before he enacted the miracle, who was acquainted with sorrow in ways that nobody can try to paint or gloss over. He is in this too, in the grief, not just after it, present in the through, not just waiting on the other side, okay? Listen, bitch. You do not have to be over it. You just have to be in it honestly and moving. So if this episode really did reach something inside of you, please like the show, subscribe, leave the review. Um, Head to brandonlynette.com, check my show notes, get on my list, watch my full episode on YouTube. You guys, I need your support over there. I'm still not even at 260 followers. Okay. So I need your help. I think my goal is like, I don't even know, but I feel it's so far away. I think it's like I have to have 1,000 or something. Get my peace patch from the show notes. Okay, that's going to be the super patch link because the nervous system carrying grief needs the same support you give everything else that matters. You know, it is drug free, ingredient free, safe for everybody. If you can wear a band-aid, you can wear my product. No chemicals, you guys. It's just your brain being reminded that it's safe to settle. Okay. Link in the show notes. Um, I mean, I have a lot of work with me options as well. Okay. That if you guys need extra help through this process, you know, there's plenty of options. There's a calendar link where we could do a free 10-minute call to see if there's anything I could do to help you move forward with wherever you are with telling your story. But babe, the through is available and it's always been available. I'll see you guys next week.